We've got a family, and a young family, and to see a black family in the White House is empowering for us.
Once inside, Michelle Obama was welcomed with rapturous applause in front of an audience of nearly 3,000 people.
Wow!
During the 90 minutes conversation, fans of Michelle Obama heard her talk about a number of issues, but her main message was about empowerment.
We assume that working class folks are not highly gifted in their own right, when a lot of times your station in life is limited by the circumstances that you find yourself in.
How was it?
It was
Great. Like, she was very witty. She was like, when someone would say a joke, she would just be automatically just on the ball, always ready.
It's just very unique. Like, you don't get the opportunity every day to see Michelle Obama, the First Lady, and she's so empowering and great in her own way, and it's just amazing to know that we as young people got that opportunity.
Did anyone get really emotional while they were
Yeah.
We still read.
And earlier today, Mrs. Obama revisited a school in North London, a place where she says she was first inspired to focus on education during her time as the First Lady.
It gives me a level of focus and determination in the work that I do when I get to see you all up close. And as I said then, you remind me of me and all the fears and all the challenges that you face.
It's not just these girls who are inspired by Michelle Obama's personal story. Her journey from a working class neighborhood in Chicago all the way to the White House has captivated millions of people all over the world.
Really good and inspiring. It was just so amazing to see Michelle Obama up so close.
And how did you find today's assembly?
It was really inspiring to look up to her as a role model and to remember the past memories that she created with us in our school.
A role model for girls past and present. She may no longer be the First Lady, but Michelle Obama continues to be an inspiration for many. Adina Campbell, BBC News.
Just finally, 3 astronauts have docked at the International Space Station on the first crewed Soyuz rocket launch since a dramatic failure in October. The trio from the United States, Canada and Russia will spend the next 6.5 months on board. The previous mission in October, you may remember, was aborted when a booster failed, forcing the 2 astronauts to make a very hasty emergency landing. Investigators blamed a faulty sensor damaged during assembly in Kazakhstan. More anytime for you on the BBC website. You can reach me and most of the team on Twitter. Thanks for watching.
Hello, a quieter, colder spell of weather for Tuesday, but then the weather gets more active again from midweek. Yes, it'll get milder, but it'll also turn wetter and windier once again. But at least for Tuesday, we are in a gap between weather systems. Here's the next one coming in. Really isn't much of an issue, though, until we get to Tuesday night and Wednesday. But in that gap between weather systems, temperatures dropping away to give a widespread frost for Tuesday morning, as low as -6 in Highland, Scotland. A few mist and fog patches around as well, and ice a potential hazard across northern and western parts of Scotland, where we've seen a few showers overnight, wintry on hills, and there is more to come, at least during the first part of Tuesday. But for many, for much of the day, it is dry, it is sunny, but yes, it's cold. The cold enhanced by the increasing cloud, though, across southern southwestern parts as we go on through the day. Some rain into the far southwest by the end of the day. May see double figures here, but most of us around 4 to 7 degrees. But again, through parts of Highland Scotland, there will be some places hovering close to freezing. And on through Tuesday evening and night, here comes the rain, slowly pushing northwards through more of England, Wales into Northern Ireland. Ahead of that weather system, temperatures are dropping away again for a frost. Coldest again in Highland Scotland, some fog patches. It becomes less cold, though, from the south, where you see that rain moving in. And then for Wednesday, there's some uncertainty about how far north the wet weather will get. Could well see some snow, though, into the Pennines, the southern uplands, and if it gets that far north, into the higher ground north of the central belt. Much of northern Scotland, though, looking to stay dry and cold. Elsewhere, it is less cold, where you're seeing the wetter, breezier conditions. The rain will clear away from Northern Ireland, but a big range of temperatures from north to south across the UK. Now, as we look at the bigger picture for Thursday and Friday, further weather fronts on Thursday, so further outbreaks of rain pushing eastwards, but we're really focusing on Friday as a deepening area of low pressure comes across the northern half of the UK. So it's here we're going to see the strongest winds, particularly affecting parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, Irish Sea coast, with gales or even severe gales in places, potentially disruptive winds, and along with that there'll be some more wet weather around as well, and some snowfall, particularly into the hills of Scotland. So we are monitoring that weather system very closely and will provide you with further updates. But this is how the rest of the week is shaping up. After the colder, drier, sunnier Tuesday, it'll be turning wetter, very windy, potentially stormy at the end of the week, but it will be turning milder for all of us for a time.
Now here's the science bit.
Ready. Could a bendy phone be the future?
There really is no driver. Oh, I feel better for that.
Click. Saturday 30 on the BBC News Channel.
Stories set to shape the news agenda. Headlines freshly written. Original perspectives on the day's unfolding narratives. See the bigger picture as it emerges. The Papers, weeknights at 10:40 on the BBC News Channel.
Latest headlines for you from BBC News. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, has told an international climate summit that the world is way off course in its plan to prevent catastrophic climate change. He warned heads of state and government at the UN Climate Conference in Poland they were still not doing enough or moving fast enough. President Trump and the First Lady Melania have paid their respects at the US Capitol, the Rotunda, where the body of former President George H.W. Bush is lying in state. Mr. Bush, who served as the 41st US President, died on Friday at the age of 94. He'll be buried on Thursday. Mexico's new President, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has signed a decree creating a truth commission to investigate the kidnapping and killing of 43 student teachers 4 years ago. It sparked weeks of protest against people in power in Mexico. Prosecutors have accused the security forces of involvement. Gone 2:30 in the morning. You're up to date on the headlines. It's time now for Monday in Parliament.
Hello again and welcome to Monday in Parliament. As the government admits, its Brexit deal isn't perfect.
I make no bones about it. I would have preferred to have seen a unilateral right of termination in this backstop.
A disabled peer shares her experience of travelling by air.
I was then passed from pillar to post, ending up in a corner facing a concrete wall and dumped by staff trying to sort out what was going on.
And a sportswear tycoon goes into battle with MPs.
By the way, that might be a godlike performance, and before anybody says it, I'm not comparing myself to God.
All that to come and more, but first, Parliament is gearing up for one of its most significant votes for decades. On Tuesday, the Prime Minister will open 40 hours of debate on her Brexit deal. On the eve of that debate, the government's chief law officer came to the Commons to explain the legal position and why the government has rejected a demand by MPs to publish the Attorney General's legal advice in full. That refusal has prompted 6 opposition parties to try to force a debate on whether the government's holding Parliament in contempt. Most of Geoffrey Cox's statement focused on the plan to avoid border checks between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic if there's no trade deal between the UK and the EU, the plan known as the backstop. Some MPs are concerned the UK couldn't leave the backstop without the EU's agreement, leaving the UK in a trap that would mean following EU rules.
There is, therefore, no unilateral right for either party to terminate this arrangement. This means that if no superseding agreement can be reached within the implementation period, the protocol would be activated, and in international law would subsist even if negotiations had broken down. The gradual loosening, removal of the legal ties that have bound us to the European Union for 45 years will take time to work out. This agreement and the EU Withdrawal Act already passed by the House allow for the necessary time and legal means for that process to unfold in a peaceful and orderly way.
The reality of this situation is that all members are asking questions at a major disadvantage because they've not read the legal advice upon which this statement is based. And it is totally unacceptable to be in this position when aspects of the Attorney General's advice have been selectively leaked to the press over the weekend.
Does he accept that it was central to the Good Friday Agreement, Belfast Agreement, that both sides committed themselves timelessly to an open border? And that is all wrapped up if we ever move to the Northern Ireland Protocol. And it would be quite shameful if either the European Union or the Republic of Ireland or the United Kingdom was given the right unilaterally to terminate that at a time of its political choosing.
I make no bones about it. I would have preferred to have seen a unilateral right of termination in this backstop. I would have preferred to have seen a clause that allowed us to exit if negotiations had irretrievably broken down. But I am prepared to lend my support to this agreement because I do not believe I'm most grateful for those cheers of applause. I do not believe, Mr. Speaker, that we are likely to be entrapped in it permanently.
He's just said that he doesn't, it's not his belief that we'll be trapped in the backstop permanently. But this House, who has to take the final decision, not the Cabinet, is not interested in his belief. It's interested in his legal opinion.
And it seems to me a situation where we're now reliant on our learned friends to take cases in international courts rather than this sovereign parliament being able to decide when we can get out of these arrangements. Can the Attorney General confirm what he said, that this is an indefinite arrangement, that it can be permanent despite what some of his Cabinet colleagues are saying in law?
The right honourable gentleman throws down a gauntlet to me to re-examine my support for the agreement. And I don't mind confessing to him that I have wrestled with this question because I am a unionist. And any divergence between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom I dislike. But I have had also to take into account that this is an arrangement which we can avoid. And secondly, that if we were in it, it would be as much an instrument of pain to the European Union as it would be to the United Kingdom.
Unfortunately, he does not answer the basic point about denying a motion passed by this House. Saying that it's in his view that that is not in the national interest is not good enough. When the government loses a vote, it must follow the will of this House under an humble address according to all precedent.
In this case, I am convinced that in order to disclose any advice that might have been given would be fundamentally contrary to the interests of this country. It's no use the baying and shouting of members opposite. What I'm trying to do is guard the public interest. That's all. And it is time they grew up and got real.
But that wasn't enough to prevent 6 opposition parties asking the Commons Speaker to begin contempt proceedings against the government for failing to comply with a motion instructing it to publish the legal advice. And that wasn't the last we heard of the plan to avoid border checks between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. The Prime Minister's chief Brexit advisor told MPs on the Exiting the EU committee that the backstop is uncomfortable for the UK.
Can I begin by expressing appreciation to you and all of your civil service colleagues for the very hard work that you've put in over the last 2.5 years into these negotiations in what I think it would be fair to describe as quite challenging circumstances. So if you could convey those thanks on behalf of the committee, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do you think the customs backstop is a bad outcome for the UK, and if so, why?
I think that the backstop is not the future relationship that either the UK or the EU wants to have with one another. And so it is an uncomfortable position for both sides. And the reality is, you know, I think, Chair, in evidence from us, but also in your meetings in Brussels, is that there is not a withdrawal agreement without a backstop. That reflects, of course, also, as I've said to this committee before, Ministers' commitments to Northern Ireland and to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, rather than being something imposed upon us. So it is a necessity, and a slightly uncomfortable necessity for both sides.
Also giving evidence was the new Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay.
Are there any provisions of that backstop protocol that you have concerns with, or are you wholly comfortable with the way that it's drafted?
Well, there are compromises. I think with any negotiation, Mr. Crabb, there are compromises.
No,
and
concerns that you have. What would be the specific concerns that you have about the way the current backstop is drafted?
Well, I think the first point I make is the intention is not to go into the backstop. So there's a number of safeguards, one of which is the option to avoid going into the backstop. There's also things like, for example, extending the interim period, implementation period.
He said the backstop would be uncomfortable for the UK and the EU.
Some in Europe have criticised the backstop. I know it seems odd in the context of the UK political debate, but some in Europe have criticised the backstop. They feel that Mr. Robbins has got an advantage in the negotiation, and the Prime Minister's got an advantage because it gives access to that market without the financial contribution and without freedom of movement. That's another reason why it's not an advantageous position for the EU.
Mr. Robbins, can I first ask you about today's Daily Telegraph and a couple of extremely interesting comments that are attributed to, which you may wish to dissociate yourself from, and I at least want to give you that opportunity. First of all, he, that is to say you, argued that extending the transition period after Brexit would provide a more cast-iron escape route. Is that your view?
You will expect me to say, Mr. Rees-Mogg, that I'm not going to comment on an apparently leaked document, but it is certainly true that if the UK were to enter into an extension to the implementation period, some of the other negative consequences of being in the backstop that the Chairman referred to at the beginning would not apply.
Secretary of State, could I ask you if you think there are any circumstances between now and next Tuesday where the Prime Minister will pull the vote?
No, I think the vote will happen on Tuesday, and I'm very much looking forward to making the case. I think the Cabinet has an important job. It's for the Cabinet as a whole to make the case ahead of Tuesday, and I think certainly what I hear from businesses up and down the country is many businesses themselves are making the case because they don't want the uncertainty that will flow if this vote does not go through.
Now, Brexit means the UK will be able to set its own immigration policy, but the Home Secretary has said it's very unlikely that MPs will see the government's plans before next week's vote on the Brexit deal. Amid reports of internal tensions over its current immigration target, Sajid Javid said the long-awaited paper would be published soon. He was challenged on the issue at question time.
The Home Secretary told his Home Affairs Select Committee that the immigration white paper would be published certainly in December. Yeah. He will know that there is obviously concern about the delays to the white paper. Can he tell us now whether it will still be published in December, and if so, why it will be published after the meaningful vote?
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, all I can say at this point is that the white paper will be published soon. I wish I could say more than that. It is worth keeping in mind that this is the biggest change in our immigration system in 4 decades. It is important that we take the time and that we get it right.
Umpires Club.
Mr. Speaker, as well as control, fairness as a principle and treating people equally regardless of where they came from in the world was right at the heart of why so many people voted to leave. So what consideration is being given to that principle of fairness as we design a new immigration system?
Mr. Speaker, I think one of the lessons from the Brexit vote was that people wanted to see control over our immigration system, an immigration system that's designed in Britain for our national interests, and that's certainly what we will be setting out, a system that's based on an individual's skills and what they have to contribute, not their nationality.
You're watching Monday in Parliament with me, David Cornock. Don't forget, if you miss our daily roundup or you just want to watch it again, you can catch up via the BBC iPlayer. The Sports Direct founder Mike Ashley has warned there might not be a high street left by 2030 unless MPs did something to check the might of internet retailers such as Amazon. He said the high street woes weren't his fault. He said he was neither Father Christmas nor God. Mr. Ashley was appearing before MPs on the Housing, Communities and Local Government Committee. They also wanted to know more about plans for his latest acquisition, the department store House of Fraser.
You took charge of that. You said that you're going to turn it, and I quote, into the Harrods of the High Street, and you're hoping to keep about 59 stores open. Now, there are many around the country that are anxious in terms of store closures. What factors would you take into consideration, or will you take into consideration when deciding on whether to close a store?
Please, it is not possible you call me here today and quote that I said I'd try and keep 59 stores open. I never said that, and you know it. This group here doesn't know I never said I would keep 59 stores open. Never.
Well, I've got a direct quote from yourself. You wanted to turn Harrods into the House of Fraser into the Harrods of the High Street and hope to keep 59 stores open. So
as many as the 59, and everybody knows I set a target of 80%. Everybody knows I set a target of 80%. Okay. What person could keep 59 stores open besides God? It's impossible. It can't be done. Okay. Why do you want to drag me to these committees and try and get me to commit to things that can't be done? There's no point. Let's be realistic. If I manage to save 80% of them, by the way, that might be a godlike performance. And before anybody says it, I'm not comparing myself to God.
Okay, brilliant. I don't think anybody else in the committee is either.
Every big retailer says the way to fix this is business rates and free parking.
And where's that money going to come from?
But it's not as simple as that, though, is it?
No.
It's actually, if you provide what people want, they'll come and buy it, whether it's on the internet or in your store. If you provide an experience, like you're saying. Correct.
But there's not enough experiences, if you like, for the big retailers to suddenly offer overnight. What you've got to do is you've got to help them by helping them help themselves. So if you think about it, if what I'm saying, and I said it earlier, Sports Direct won't be very pleased with me for my suggestion. It's not necessarily a good fix for Sports Direct as a group. What it is a fantastic fix for the High Street. And we have to realise the High Street won't make 2030. It's not going to be there. Unless you do something really radical and grab the bulls by the horns, it won't be there. I'm sitting here voting to punish SDI Group. That is not very normal. Why would I do it? Because if the High Street miraculously, the minority now can be saved, in 2030, guess what? I might have a fabulous business still. Otherwise, I'm just going to end up being a web player. Like the vast majority of the High Street. You really have to grab the bull by the horns. But now, and you can't put in a watered down version, because a watered down version won't work.
Mike Ashley. The naturalist Sir David Attenborough has said climate change is humanity's greatest threat in thousands of years. He was speaking at the opening ceremony of United Nations-sponsored climate talks in Poland. And climate change was among the topics raised with the Prime Minister on her return from the G20 summit, the meeting of the leaders of the world's largest economies.
As climate change is the biggest issue facing our world, it is imperative that a sustainable economic trade model is put forward that puts people and the planet over profit.
On climate change, I made clear the UK's determination to lead the way on the serious threat this poses to our planet. We need a step change in preparing for temperature rises, to cut the cost and impact of climate-related disasters, and to secure food, water and jobs for the future.
Will the Prime Minister share with us an update on her government's actions over the past 2 years to tackle climate change? Or has she been too distracted to get on with the real job of government?
Speaking today at the UN Climate Summit, Sir David Attenborough told world leaders that the collapse of our civilisations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon. That is a very stark warning. I welcome the government's contribution to the renewable energy platform, but can the Prime Minister explain why the government is refusing to engage in the important fossil fuel subsidy peer review process, which is being led by the G20, despite the UK handing out billions to dirty energy every single year?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady that we do recognise the significance of climate change. We also recognise, she referenced a quote from David Attenborough there, actually we recognise the importance of action in other areas as well, such as the protection of species around the world. That's why we held the conference in October here in the UK on the international wildlife trade, which is another aspect of the future of our world. And in relation to energy sources, we do believe in having a mixed economy in relation to those sources.
Mrs May was also pressed over the seizure of Ukrainian ships by Russia and over her meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, following the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
Rather than be robust, as she promised, we learned the Prime Minister told the dictator, please don't use the weapons we are selling you in the war you're waging, and asked him nicely to investigate the murder he allegedly ordered. Leaders should not just offer warm words against human rights atrocities, but back up their words with action.
We've been absolutely robust in our response in relation to the terrible murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and very clear about the need for those responsible to be held to account. He referenced the war in Yemen. I might remind the right honourable gentleman that the coalition intervention in the Yemen was actually requested by the legitimate government of the Yemen and has been acknowledged by the United Nations Security Council.
56,000 people killed, 14 million living through a humanitarian crisis in Yemen. What is her price to ensure human rights are more important than blood money from the sale of arms?
The question of providing for those people who are suffering terribly in the Yemen today is about ensuring that there is a political solution in the Yemen. That's what we believe. There is an opportunity for that now. That is what we have been encouraging all the parties to come together for. That is why the talks that are going to take place over the coming days and weeks in Stockholm are so important.
What executive actions beyond condemnation the G20 partners agreed on Russia's blatant and wholly unacceptable piracy in the Sea of Azov and the wider Black Sea?
Will she look at ways in which we can step up pressure on Russia to release not just the 24 sailors but also the 68 other Ukrainian political prisoners held in occupied Crimea and in Russia?
This fits into a pattern of Russian behaviour. We will indeed continue to press for appropriate action to be taken in these matters. As I've said in response to a previous question, the UK has been leading in the EU in pressing for sanctions, and we will continue to do so, and I look forward to discussing with other EU leaders further steps that can be taken.
The government was defeated in the House of Lords over part of its counter-terrorism bill. Peers voted in support of a proposal to give greater safeguards to aid workers going into conflict areas. The bill includes a measure that could lead to a British national being jailed for 10 years if he or she visited a designated conflict zone without a reasonable excuse.
It's not clear either what would count as proof of a legitimate reason for being in a designated area. Would it be a letter on headed paper from the employer or more substantive evidence? And carrying such evidence in some form in and out of a ward zone could pose security risks for the individual and those in the conflict area. And if the risks of going to a particular area are increased for UK nationals or residents, then their organisation, national or international, is less likely to want to send them.
The police have been extremely clear for some time, since well before this new power was introduced, that any person returning from Syria who has travelled there for any reason can expect to be investigated to establish what risk, if any, they may pose. And this, my lords, is simply common sense, given the level of risk associated with such areas.
But a few minutes later, the proposal to safeguard aid workers was passed by 220 votes to 191, a government defeat by 29. Also in the Lords, ministers came under pressure to do more for disabled people travelling by air. Two peers shared personal experience of the challenges some people with disabilities can face from airline and airport staff.
A fortnight ago, I travelled from Heathrow to Madrid and back. And my experience included staff telling me they couldn't lift my suitcase because they weren't insured to lift suitcases on check-in, and despite a large orange label on my chair saying bring to the plane at Madrid, when I arrived at Madrid I was told I didn't have a chair on the plane at all. I was then passed from pillar to post, ending up in a corner facing a concrete wall and dumped by staff trying to sort out what was going on. I ended up in tears while they tried to find my wheelchair. My lords, if this were an unusual occurrence, it would be horrific, but it isn't. What's even more horrific is that this happens every single day to air passengers. Charters, butter, no parsnips. When will the regulations be enforced and stop air travel being a ghetto for disabled people?
My Lords, I'm incredibly sorry to hear the Noble Lady's experience, and she is absolutely right that these occurrences happen far too often, and that's what we need to change. Today is the United Nations International Day of Persons with Disabilities. I think it's really important that we as a country continue to work with international forums to promote greater accessibility for flying for people with reduced mobility. One of the main reasons actually for some of these issues is the provision of information, particularly on inbound flights coming in and when people travel internationally, and that absolutely is something which we should get right, and we'll be working with our international partners to try to do so.
Isn't it about time that the security rules were proportionate to the services? My stepson, who's lost a leg some time ago, was forced to take his leg off, his prosthetic leg off, in Newquay Airport in front of a lot of passengers and his family when he was flying on that international service to the Isles of Scilly. Now, for goodness sake, surely there should be a rule to have a bit more common sense applied to such searches.
My Lords, as well as setting the right standards for service, we do need to, of course, make sure that all staff are properly trained to address these issues. We are including a proposed measure for training programmes to improve disability awareness for all customer-facing staff, be that at the border or for ground handlers, but absolutely